Now that December is bringing in that winter chill, it's pretty obvious that I personally won't be getting to any other theme parks soon. So I figured I'd run down my full 2021 with all my park trips and credits. Also throw in some of my favorites, surprises, and of course the unfortunate disappointments. So here's my full 2021. It feels like a little bit of an understatement to say I only went to a few amusement parks in 2021. The year started off with my second ever visit to Nickelodeon Universe in February. Then about a month later, I took my first ever trip to Texas to visit the original Six Flags park. And while April was quiet, I did finally go down to Casino Pier in June. Then only 2 weeks later, I went to my home park, Six Flags Great Adventure, to finally experience their new long-awaited coaster, Jersey Devil. Then just about 2 weeks later, I made my first ever visit to Mason, Ohio, the 2 days on 4th of July weekend at Kings Island. At the end of July, I got my first ever trip to Coney Island as well, even though I lived only about an hour away my whole life. September was another home park visit to Six Flags New England, which basically served as a refresh of everything they had with nothing new. In October, I decided to take a quick trip to Dorney Park for the first time in a couple of years. So in total, I visited 9 different parks, 5 of which were brand new to me. And there was also one ski mountain with a mountain coaster if you want to count that too. After all that, I managed to add 38 new roller coaster credits to my count, with most coming from Kings Island or over Texas, leaving me with a solid even 160 total. Now, I was able to snag some missing credits from parks I had also already been to, such as Demon Drop and Wild Mouse from Dorney, and Slime Streak from Nickelodeon Universe. Let's move on to some pleasant surprises and overall favorite stuff from the year. Going to Kings Island, I had many expectations. However, the biggest wild card had to be Mystic Timbers, which I'd heard both rave and underwhelming reviews about. After riding both in the front and in the back, as well as getting a night ride, it became abundantly clear to me, in my opinion, that this was the best ride in the park. Not only was it the best ride in the park, but it wasn't really all that close either. It was extremely smooth and supplied a really non-stop, forceful experience that left me absolutely giddy afterwards. The ride is so good that sitting in the overly humid shed afterwards doesn't really do anything to negate my opinions. Besides, if you're gonna sit on the brake run anyway, at least you get a little bit of entertainment. Now, unfortunately, not every new experience can be as good as that one. In the same park, Diamondback was a very polarizing ride for me. It had easily the strongest airtime of any B&M hypercoaster I'd ever been on, even more than Candemonium, which is my favorite by the manufacturer. That is because the rattle throughout Diamondback's ride is pretty bad. Most notably in the back wing seats, my first ride gave me a pretty substantial headache, but I definitely noticed that it went away and came back depending on the time of day we rode, what rows we sat in, and like most B&M hypers, it can be quite temperamental with the ride experience. Might as well finish up the stuff from Kings Island. A very pleasant surprise and probably one of my overall favorites of the year was just how impressive their operations were. Specifically on rides like Banshee and Orion, trains were continually pumped out at a rate I haven't really seen before. Under a minute almost every time. If you sat in the front 3 rows, the attendees were beating people to pulling down their restraints constantly. Speaking of your front row rides, on Banshee, that has to be one of my overall favorites. It's the right experience in almost every way. It's my favorite experience on any invert that I've ridden. Similarly though, my low expectations of the rattle on the coaster were only enforced when I sat in the back, which ended up being an extremely jarring and unpleasant experience. But if you can ride towards the front, it's one of the more insane coaster experiences in the world. Now, moving down to South Texas, the only ride that really disappointed me was Shockwave. Unfortunately, due to some downtime and other factors, I only got one ride during my 2 days there, and that was in the front row. And after that extremely intense double loop to start the ride, it really didn't do anything. Any airtime throughout the rest of the course was extremely small, little pops here and there, but I had heard there's supposedly some strong ejector in multiple spots. Of course, it's probably very different sitting in the back row, but it just gives me a reason to go back and get some re-rides. That being said, Titan was actually one of my pleasant surprises for the trip. I went in with pretty low expectations because everyone seems to put a lot of hate on the Juvenola hypercoasters. But while the ride isn't nowhere near the top of my hyper list, it's still a pretty fun attraction. It's got tons of speed, it's smooth, and it's got some really good intensity towards the end. It makes it a fun ride experience. Now, it takes up a lot of space and could be replaced with something better, but I found it to be my third favorite ride in the park, barely beating out Batman the Ride. although easily the best part of the entire Texas trip can probably be broken down into a single element. The spike on Mr. Freeze when sitting in the back row is one of the best experiences on any roller coaster. It feels like you float to the top for multiple seconds of airtime before being yanked back down through the rest of the course again. While I wasn't entirely overly impressed by the ride as a whole, I have it ranked just above the Flight of Fear clones. That one moment really stands out across the entire park. While New Texas Giant is easily the best coaster in the park, it doesn't really have the pure standout element that I think that back spike has. Now, returning to Dorney Park also gave me some interesting feedback. Everything was pretty much how I remembered it, with Talon being a bottom tier invert, Hydra being a quirky, floorless coaster, and overall the park just feeling like it needs something new and a little more standout. However, Steel Force was definitely running a little bit better than the first time I rode it. While the first half still did nothing like always, the second half with the Bunny Hills definitely gave a little bit more airtime than I remembered. Not enough to put it anywhere significant on my list, but up a couple spots nonetheless. Needless to say, it was still my favorite ride in the park, and was also very nice to actually get on Demon Drop, which I was very excited for on my first visit, but it never opened, so I didn't really expect to get on it in October with colder weather, but sometimes you get lucky. Unfortunately, not every return trip makes you feel better about a coaster. Going back to Six Flags New England, I got multiple re-rides on Superman again, and riding it before the restraint change and after, those have changed, and so have my opinions. Obviously, everyone knows that the layout is one of the best hyper layouts ever built. Honestly, the new restraints just don't mix with something with my legs. The airtime is all there, but it's ruined no matter how much room I seem to get or don't get, because the restraints pin my legs in a way that's just too painful. In my opinion, I would much rather have Skyrush's restraints than the ones that are on Superman. Also, I kind of noticed the first time that first drop is really shallow, and in the back it doesn't really give that great of airtime anyway. Anyway, it's probably the only part of the layout that I would change, but because of those restraints, it's dropped in my rankings, and I have it below Nitro and Apollo's Chariot now. Now, on a more positive note, Wicked Cyclone continues to impress me every time I visit. That first drop in the back row with any sort of space provides some of the more intense whip over a first drop that you're going to experience. The other big coaster disappointment for me had to be the second half of Jersey Devil. While I loved the first half and still think that it's the second best coaster in the park, how slow that second half was running when I got to ride, which was only a couple days after opening, was really shocking. While every other RMC I've experienced up to that point has felt expertly crafted, including the first one, the ending to Jersey Devil just kind of felt like somebody messed up their math. The 3 airtime hills after the turnaround were so sluggish that they didn't give even floater airtime, let alone the typical ejector you expect from RMC. Since then, I've heard that it's running better with a lot less on the mid-course brake run and changing the wheel assemblies, so I really need to get back to see for myself. But it still makes me really want to get down to either Texas or California to ride one of the original Raptors. And just as a quick add-on, it's also a big disappointment I didn't get to my other home park, which is Hershey this year. Now, I got to go last year with Candemonium, which was incredible. Obviously, it's my favorite B&M, but unfortunately, we didn't have the time for a quick trip this year, which means, once again, I didn't get to ride Stormrunner, which is always a downer because it's one of my personal favorite coasters. So I really hope to get out there next year again, and along with rides that I thought I would go to again this year, like Kennywood and Cedar Point. So that's a wrap on 2021. I'm going to be holding off on my top 20 roller coaster video probably till sometime in late January, because in mid-January I'll be going to Orlando, Florida, giving both Fun Spot parks, Disney parks, and both Universal parks, as well as SeaWorld Orlando. So that's going to shake up my top 20 probably, with Velocicoaster and Mako being new credits. So we'll see when that comes out. But till next week, that's all from the shores of Island Coasters.